Firetide. Spark. Hanzu perched atop the slanted rooftop, the red of his firetide garb catching the last rays of twilight. Before him lay the narrow streets of Greenwall, alive with faint lanterns and drifting smoke from evening hearths. He brushed a fingertip against the scroll tucked beneath his belt. The official contract granting him legal authority to end the life of Walid Keysatchel. The parchment glimmered faintly, embossed with the black flame insignia of his father, and annotated with astrological parameters, the Surtur moon waxing, and the rising of the Black Serpent constellation. The alignment dictated the window of opportunity. The moment had to be precise, or the spell-laden protections around the sorcerer could turn lethal to the unprepared. The scroll had rated this contract as medium threat, a sorcerer of moderate skill. Dangerous, if underestimated, but not beyond the reach of a properly disciplined Firetide assassin. Hanzu's eyes, barely visible above the mask, traced the alley below where his target moved, hands brushing over faint magical wards in the air, as if unaware of the deadly gaze from above. He remembered, as a boy, balancing on wooden beams during training drills, learning to sense the rhythm of his own weight, the cadence of his breath. That rhythm now guided him, steady and unbroken. A faint creak betrayed him. A loose tile, disturbed by his shifting weight, tumbled to the cobblestones below with a sharp clack. The sorcerer's head snapped up, eyes wide. Hanzu froze a heartbeat, then flowed into motion. The prey recognized danger, sprinting down the alley, boots clattering against stones, as though the streets themselves beat a frantic warning drum. Hanzu followed, dropping from roof to roof, the swing of his sword across his back keeping pace with his leap. He was both shadow and flame, predator and student merged. Walid Keysatchel barreled through the streets, clutching a spell-laced tome, weaving through merchants and startled townsfolk. The target's breath came in sharp bursts, and Hanzu felt the thrill of the hunt deepen, recalling the old lesson: fire waits for the moment, but when it strikes, nothing survives. Keysatchel burst into the Hap's ale parlor, its doors swinging wide, spilling warm light and the smell of malt into the alley. Patrons froze mid-laugh, mugs suspended in air. Hanzu followed the trajectory, silent as smoke, landing on the tiled roof above the doorway. He crouched, eyes tracking the sorcerer as he disappeared into the crowded inn, and the master's voice echoed in his memory. The target may flee into the chaos of the world. That is when your fire must burn brightest. The alehouse was a new battlefield, unpredictable and filled with potential traps. Hanzu adjusted his grip on his sword, ready to descend into the melee if necessary. The hunt had shifted from shadowed rooftops to crowded chaos, but the principles remained: patience, discipline, precision. The Firetide Way was a river of flame, and he would see this contract completed before the stars themselves shifted. Hanzu stepped through the door of the Hap's ale parlor, the air thick with the scent of malt and roasted meat. Conversation died like a candle in wind. Those who knew the meaning of the red Firetide garb slid quietly from his path, pressing themselves against the walls. Others, slower to read the danger, were pulled aside by quick, urgent hands. In moments the center of the room lay open, a makeshift arena with the sorcerer standing at its far edge. Walid Keysatchel's lips moved, syllables rolling out in a language as old as bone, fingers weaving sigils in the air. The hairs on Hanzu's forearms prickled. He had seen this type of casting before. The master's words returned to him: when the prey bares its fangs, the fire must strike first. Without breaking stride, Hanzu's hand clamped the edge of a nearby table. He lifted and flung it with the ease of a man tossing kindling onto a fire. The heavy oak crashed through the air, scattering mugs and plates, shattering the forming spell in a blast of startled gasps. In the same breath, Hanzu leapt, a tumbling arc through the air, boots angled forward like the talons of a hawk stooping on a hare. He struck Keysatchel square in the shoulders, driving the man down hard onto the beer-stained hardwood. The sorcerer's breath left him in a single ragged gasp, arms splayed. The sound of his tome hitting the floor echoing like a death knell. Hanzu did not end it then. He paced in a slow circle, eyes fixed on the man writhing at his feet, the way a tiger might prowl around a wounded deer. His steps were deliberate, letting his prey feel the inevitability of what was to come. This was not cruelty, it was the lesson. Pain as the final teacher, fear as the last pupil. The master had told him once, in the shadow of the fire pit, the flame does not devour all at once. It licks at the edges until the center surrenders. Hansu's hand drifted toward the hilt of his sword. The moment to strike cleanly would come. For now, he let the prey feel the fire closing in. Hansu's gaze flicked across the room, catching movement near the bar. A wench, only the second female he had ever seen in his life, having grown up in the all-male cloister of the Firetide dojo, carried a tray of drinks with careful precision. He did not lust, did not seek charm or distraction, it was simply odd. Her presence here, in the midst of his first sanctioned contract, felt almost like an anomaly in the patterns he had studied all his life. Kisachel's breath came ragged, hands twitching futilely. Hansu advanced slowly, each step deliberate, the master's words echoing. In his memory, the flame does not rush, it consumes with inevitability. He pressed the heel of his boot against the sorcerer's neck, pinning him to the beer-stained floor. The victim struggled, but it was no use. With a single fluid motion, Hansu drew the sword from his back and slid it deep into the sorcerer's heart. The blade drank silently, and the body went slack beneath him. Hansu lingered a heartbeat longer, studying the stillness, the lesson complete. Predator and prey had played their roles perfectly. He straightened, eyes sweeping the room. The bar was unnervingly quiet, the few patrons frozen between curiosity and fear. Hanzo moved to the counter and ordered a wine. The barkeep's hands shook as he replied, We have none, sir." Hanzu shook his head almost imperceptibly, the mask hiding any trace of emotion. He placed a single coin on the counter, heavy and silent. It was left ambiguously, payment for the cleaning of blood, or perhaps to cover the burial of a man whose life had ended under the strict discipline of Firetide law. No one could be certain. Hanzu turned, gliding out of the Hap sale parlor as quietly as he had entered, the red of his garb disappearing into the evening shadows, leaving only whispers in his wake and the faint impression of fire lingering in the air. Stoke. The scribe post was quiet when Hanzu arrived, tucked in the shadow of a narrow alley, its lanterns flickering against the early evening chill. A single parchment awaited him, rolled and sealed with the familiar black flame insignia of his father. He broke the seal and read the contents slowly, his eyes tracing each line as though committing it to memory. Target: Orthol Mizzen, execute by waxing of Heimdall's moon in black serpent. Zenith threat level, low occupation, silversmith payout, 12 gold. Beneath the standard details, a line in the flowing guild script gleamed. Faintly in the lantern light, burn slow, burn warm, burn eternal. No address, no hints, nothing but the target's name, and the date dictated by the stars. This was a test. Hanzu knew it immediately. The Firetide Guild never wasted lessons. This assignment was meant to see how well he could track, observe, and predict within the chaos of a living city. Greenwall would be his proving ground. He tucked the scroll safely beneath his belt, letting the edges of his red garb brush the rooftops as he ascended to his perch. The city below stretched like a living map, lanterns flickering in the alleys, rooftops, catching the last warmth of the sun, voices drifting up in a layered hum. Hansu began his hunt, not with a target in sight, but with a rhythm. He moved from shadow to shadow, listening for the distinct jingle of metal tools, watching for glimmers of molten silver in shop windows, studying the patterns of craftsmen closing their stalls, and the guards' rotation across streets. Every step was a lesson from the past, every glance a measure of distance and timing. The guild had taught him to read life itself, posture, motion, breath. Now, he applied it to the unknown. The silversmith could be anywhere, blending with the crowd of artisans and merchants. But Hanzu treated every alley, every doorway, every roofline as a potential clue. He paused at the corner of a bustling plaza, noticing a man wiping his hands on a cloth, pausing at the display of fine jewelry. A subtle reflection of candlelight caught his eyes, and for a heartbeat, Hanzu felt the faint stir of recognition, not the target itself, but the type of behavior a silversmith would exhibit. Patience. Observation. Patience. Each step forward, each alley scouted, was a silent test, and Hanzu's mind ran the calculus as he planned the inevitable encounter. This hunt would be slower, quieter. No rooftop leaps, no shattered alehouse tables. It was tracking, waiting, and understanding. A meditation as much as an assassination. The Firetide way demanded nothing less. Smoke. Hanzu moved silently through the streets of Greenwall, blending with the ebb and flow of evening crowds. The clatter of boots on cobblestones, the murmur of merchants haggling, the creak of shutters being drawn. Each sound was a line in the map he built in his mind. He did not chase blindly, he traced patterns, noting how artisans moved between workshops and plazas, how their gestures revealed rhythm and habit. A faint glint in a side street caught his eye, a silver reflection from a candlelit window, a hand running over polished tools. He paused, crouching atop the edge of a wooden awning, watching the small, deliberate movements of a man shaping molten silver. Yyth Mizzen perhaps, though Hanzu allowed himself no certainty yet. Patience was the key. He moved slowly, slipping into shadowed alleys, observing the silversmith's interactions from afar. Mizzen paused at a shop counter, examining a coin under a magnifying lens, fingers brushing over fine filigree. The predator in Hanzu noted the precision, the calm repetition, traits of someone whose livelihood depended on focus and care. These were clues, small but unmistakable. Hanzu's mind wandered briefly to his training as a boy, Master Rensai's drills in the bamboo grove, learning to read the weight of each leaf in the wind, to sense the subtle shifts in posture before a strike. Those lessons applied now in the city, a hand that paused too long on a doorframe, a step that faltered under weight, a glance that lingered too long on the surroundings. By nightfall, Hanzu had followed Mizzen from workshop to alley, noting every door and street exit, the flow of citizens around him, the hidden nooks where a man could vanish. He traced the silversmith's habits like a river tracing a bed of stone, silent and patient, letting the current guide him closer. Finally, Mizzen stopped at a narrow lane, glancing over his shoulder as if feeling unseen eyes. Hanzu allowed himself the smallest smile behind his mask. The hunt was working. Every observation, every pause, every unspoken rhythm of the city was a lesson learned, a test passed. Hanzu crouched on the roof above, shadow among shadows, watching his prey. The guild's test was not the kill, it was the mastery of the city itself. He had 3 weeks to understand Greenwall, and now he had found the thread that would lead him to Yyth Mizzen. The night deepened, lanterns flickered, and Hanzu, predator and student, prepared for the final approach. Sons of Set. The rooftops of Freya Corner were no stranger to him. Hanzu moved like a shadow gliding between tiles. Never a sound too loud, never a step too bold. His quarry had eluded him for 3 days, and the guild's parchment weighed heavier in his thoughts with each passing night. Yyth Mizzen, silversmith, threat level low, payout 12 gold, a simple test. The words written in guild script had burned into him, burn slow, burn warm, burn eternal. The mark of Firetide discipline. Yet no location was listed. That alone made the task more than simple. It made it a measure of his worth. The city below pulsed with life. Lanterns swung in breezes, taverns burst with laughter and quarrels. The bell of the watchtower tolled midnight. He paused on the ridge of an old apothecary, and crouched low, scanning the streets. His eyes were trained not only for the silversmith, but for the watchers. The other hunters, thieves, spies who made Embermark their web. The guild had warned him, though never with words, that others would always be watching. That was when he saw him. A figure on the opposite rooftop, not a guild runner, not a common thief. This one moved with patience, a snake's patience, gliding in white-grey robes that blended with moonlight. He was too deliberate to be a cutpurse, too calm to be desperate. Something about him whispered cultist. Hansu's lips thinned. He decided to follow. Stalk. The stranger led him across half the market district, moving roof to roof. Where Hansu paused in shadow, the man never even looked back, yet his pace suggested he knew he was not alone. Finally, at the corner of Tallow Alley, the figure vanished through an open skylight into a derelict granary. Hanzo slid across the tiles, landing silently near the aperture, and peered in. What he saw churned his gut. The inside of the granary had been gutted of its beams and shelves. The dusty chamber now served as a temple, an altar shaped of broken stones, a circle painted in chalk and old blood, candles set in serpent coils of bronze. 20 figures knelt in silence, their hoods low, their hands pressed together in supplication. The white-robed man he had followed took his place at the head, and in one motion the assembly began to chant. Set. Coil us. Bind us. Strike us. The sound was a hiss, 1,000 serpents speaking through men's throats. Hanzo drew back. This was no mark of the guild. This was corruption, ancient and organized. His instincts told him to return to the guild with knowledge, but his discipline told him to learn more first. He shifted back across the roof. And then the spell struck. A rope of emerald light shot from the skylight, wrapping his torso. It coiled around his arms, legs, throat, tightening, squeezing. His breath choked short. His balance wavered, and before he could sever it with a blade, the coils yanked. Hanzu plummeted from the rooftop. The world spun, the tiles, the alley, the moon above. Yet Firetide training rooted him. He bent, twisted, and landed on his feet in the alley below, still bound, knees bent to absorb the fall. His arms remained shackled in the light snakes, but his stance was stable. Above, the cultists hissed in unison. They poured from the skylight like a spill of oil, dropping to the ground around him. Torches flared in their hands, their faces hidden behind hoods. Smolder. They dragged him not to the street, but to a hidden courtyard, through a passage of crumbled stone. The place smelled of char and iron, burnt offerings, old blood. Torches lined the walls, each in the mouth of a bronze serpent. A well sat in the center, its stone rim blackened by fire. There, in the glow, the cult gathered. Perhaps 30 of them. They chanted, their coils of magic binding him still, their hisses echoing off stone. Hanzu exhaled slowly. Firetide discipline demanded calm. Burn slow, burn warm, burn eternal. He focused not on the coil, but on the rhythm of his pulse. He knew the truth, the magic binding him was strong, but it was wielded by men. And men could bleed. Strike him, one voice hissed. The first cultist lunged, blade flashing. Hanzo pivoted, even bound, using the coil as leverage. He twisted his body, kicked outward with both legs. His heel struck the cultist's jaw. Bone cracked, teeth sprayed. The man crumpled. A roar of hisses answered. 3 more surged forward. Hanzu bent at the knees, snapped upward, and swung his bound arms like a hammer. The coil became a weapon. The emerald bindings cracked into the skull of the nearest, knocking him cold. The other 2 slashed at his sides, but Firetide demanded foresight. Hanzu rolled, absorbed the blades into shallow cloth tears, then slammed his shoulder into one gut. The man toppled. Still bound. Still fighting. The courtyard erupted into chaos. They came in waves, cultists with daggers, cudgels, chains. Hanzu spun, twisted, kicked, using their numbers against them. Firetide was not about rage, but balance. Each movement was calculated, efficient. He used one man's body to shield another, drove knees into ribs, cracked skulls against stone. The coils held his arms tight, yet his legs and shoulders became weapons enough. A knife bit his thigh. He grunted, twisted, and drove his head into the attacker's nose. Blood burst. Another caught him from behind, trying to drag him down. Hanzu dropped suddenly, pulling his assailant over him, then kicked up, flinging the man into the fire basin. Flames roared higher as robes ignited. They hissed louder. 10, down. 20, still standing. The coils squeezed tighter. Sweat beaded on his brow, his breath growing heavy. He knew he could not last forever. Yet Firetide whispered, endurance is victory. Patience is fire's strength. More came. He swept legs, cracked spines, disarmed blades with a twist of his wrists bound in coil. One cultist tried to stab him from the side. Hanzu caught the man's wrist in the coils themselves, used the magic's tension as leverage, and snapped the joint. The scream echoed high. They faltered, but they did not break. The sons of Set fought not like men but like serpents, relentless and unfeeling. And then, a voice silenced them. Enough. Yyth, the priest of serpents. From the stairway at the courtyard's far end, he descended. Yyth. His robes were white as bone, lined with golden scales. From his shoulders hung small snake ringlets, alive, hissing, twining through his vestments. His eyes glowed faintly yellow, like a predator's. He walked unarmed, but the air bent around him with command. The cultists withdrew at once, bowing heads. Even those still groaning in pain sank lower in reverence. Yyth's voice slithered through the courtyard. The coils did not break you. 30 of my sons could not bind your fire. Remarkable. Hanzu said nothing. His stance straightened, blood trickling from his thigh, his breathing steady despite the battle. The priest drew closer, hands folded in front of him. You have discipline. Discipline I could use. The firetide burns within you, yet the flame may serve the serpent as well as the sun. Why waste such strength on coin and parchment? Hanzu's eyes narrowed. Yyth tilted his head, studying him. I could loose you now. Let you walk into the temple of Thor as my hand and blade. Slay their priest for me. The people would kneel to Set in his absence, and you would be rewarded beyond your guild scraps. The coils tightened again, responding to Yyth's command. Pain lanced through Hanzu's ribs. The snake ringlets writhed on the priest's robes, their tongues tasting the air. Still, Hanzu spoke at last. His voice was calm, steady as stone. I am not your coil. I burn. The courtyard hissed at the defiance. Yyth smiled faintly, showing no anger. So the fire resists. Good. Fire that yields too easily is useless. But consider, fire unbound becomes ash. Only the serpent coils give shape, give direction. Without Set, you will die in alleys and shadows, forgotten. With us, you will live eternal. Hanzu inhaled deeply. His focus turned inward, into the furnace of Firetide. He saw the flame not as wild, but as steady. Not as ash, but as light. Burn slow, burn warm, burn eternal. He exhaled. And then he pulled. With all the strength of body and will, Hanzu wrenched against the coils. His muscles screamed, veins bulged, the emerald light trembled. Yyth's smile flickered. The cult hissed in shock. The bindings shattered. Like glass breaking, the coils splintered into sparks of green. His arms were free, his body unbound. The courtyard fell silent. Hanzu stepped forward, his eyes locked on Yyth. Tell your god, fire does not coil. Yyth's expression shifted, amusement, then curiosity, then hunger. Yes, he whispered. Yes, you will do. But Hanzu did not wait for more words. He moved. Shade. What followed was a storm. The cult surged again, but this time he was unbound. His fists became fire, his strikes thunder. He tore through them, breaking bodies with precision and fury. The courtyard blazed with chaos. Torches falling, robes burning, blood spilling on stone. Yyth only watched. Never once did he lift a hand. His eyes gleamed brighter as his sons fell around him. Finally, with half the cult broken, Hanzu stood panting, sweat and blood on his skin. Yyth stepped closer, serpents hissing at his shoulders. You will return, the priest whispered. Whether by fire or by coil, none leave the sons of Set untouched. Hanzu's grip tightened on a fallen blade, but the fire tide within counseled restraint. The guild's contract still waited. Orthol Mizzen still breathed somewhere in Embermark, and his test was not yet complete. Without a word, he turned, vaulted the courtyard wall, and vanished into the night. Behind him, the hissing continued. Low, patient, eternal. Shadow of Set. The city slept, or appeared to. Hanzo moved through the streets of Greenwall as he had for days, silent, methodical, a hunter in his own right. The wind in the alley carried the scent of smoke, roasted meats, and ink, mingling. In the way a predator's nostrils detect the faintest trace of prey, his mind had begun the rhythm of tracking Mizzen once more, assessing, predicting, calculating. His red garb hid him in the shadows, blending with the lantern flicker, blending with the thought of inevitability, unseen, watching, waiting. Green eyes gleamed in darkness. The sons of Set had not abandoned him. They had retreated that night in the courtyard, broken but patient, and now they trailed him silently, slipping between rooftops and alleyways, moving as coiled serpents across a city that believed itself safe. Hanzo did not notice them. He could not. His focus was singular, his mind a steady flame against the distraction of the living city. Every doorway, every window, every possible path a silversmith might use, was catalogued in his memory, measured and mapped like a chessboard. But the sons of Set did not need haste. They were patient. Hanzo followed the faint glimmer of candlelight from a workshop in the merchant district. The reflection of molten silver in Orthol Mizzen's hands told him he was close. He had predicted the silversmith's path perfectly. Every pattern observed, every hesitation recorded. The hunt was nearly complete. Yet, as Hanzo turned a corner, a shadow detached itself from the wall. One of the cultists, then another. They moved silently. 3 steps behind, then 5, always hidden in the folds of the city's pulse. Hanzo's peripheral senses caught nothing. The predator was unaware he had become prey. By the time he reached the narrow alley where Mizzen would make his final steps toward home, the sons of Set struck. A dozen cultists erupted from hidden recesses. Hanzo spun, limbs ready, eyes narrowing. Yet even with all his Firetide training, the surprise staggered him. The silversmith cried out in terror, but the cult moved faster than he had anticipated. In a blur, Mizzen was seized, forced into a side passage, dagger at his throat. Hanzo lunged, but the sons of Set pressed, interposing their bodies, their movements synchronized like living scales. The assassin's strikes found only empty air, hitting stone, metal, or thin fabric. Hanzo cursed silently. Patience, he reminded himself. Precision. Observation. Yet, the prey was gone. Mizzen, the target he had stalked for days, had been snatched from him. The courtyard of their abduction was empty. Hanzo's only clue, the faint echo of chanting and hissing, told him one thing. The cult had learned the rhythms of his hunt and used it against him. Smother. Night deepened. Hanzo retreated across the rooftops, silent, careful. But he could feel it in the air. The sons of Set had followed him relentlessly. And now, in the cover of darkness, their ritual began. 3 priests emerged from shadow, robes flowing, hoods low. Their hands moved in patterns Hanzo recognized from his earliest lessons in magical observation. Runes carved in the air, whispers slithering like snakes across the rooftops. Before he could react, coils of green magic wrapped around his limbs, tighter than the courtyard's attempt. His body stiffened, muscles screaming against the enchantment. He kicked, spun, tried to leverage himself free, but each motion only strengthened the bindings. The priests chanted, their voices a low, undulating hiss. Hanzo felt the subtle pressure in his mind, a tug on his thoughts, his focus, the very flame of his discipline. His vision blurred, perception skewed, the streets and rooftops bending in a serpentine wave. The bindings forced him to kneel atop a roof, forced him to look at the city from above as though he were an object to be moved. The cultists whispered, feeding suggestions into the coil. Slowly, imperceptibly, they guided his attention, not to Mizzen, not to revenge, but forward, toward the Church of Thor, toward the priest, Welian Yggdrass. Hansu resisted. Every muscle, every breath, every thought screamed against the charm. Fire does not bow, fire does not bend. Yet the spells worked like slow venom, subtle, insidious. The sons of Set did not demand, they persuaded, gradually replacing intent with suggestion. Strike the priest of Thor, the chant hissed. Strike him, and release the flame within. Hansu's mind wrestled the command. Reflexively, he tested the edges of his will, probing for weaknesses in the charm. The Firetide discipline demanded observation, reflection, patience, and he found a kernel of lucidity. Within the swirl of imposed thoughts, he retained a small, bright flame of self. Enough to move, enough to act. Snuff. The morning moon had waned slightly, casting long shadows across the city streets. Hanzo moved, still bound by residual magic, still resisting the whispered coils. In his mind, but compelled to pursue a target that now was dictated for him. He approached the Church of Thor, towering stone and carved reliefs glinting in torchlight. Citizens passed unaware, merchants opening stalls, apprentices running errands. To them, Hansu was just another shadow in the night. But he moved with intent, limbs coiled and ready, eyes scanning, mind sharp. The church doors were massive, oak with iron hinges. They groaned faintly as Hansu pushed them open, slipping inside like water through a crevice. The interior was dim, lit only by candles along the aisles. The scent of incense, pine, wax, and human breath stung his senses. And there, at the altar, knelt Welian Yggdrass. The priest's voice was low, muttering prayers to Thor, hammer and storm, protection and judgment. Hansu's mind, tangled by charm yet sharpened by instinct, calculated angles, escape routes, distance, timing. The Firetide way was clear: strike when opportunity meets preparation, but never recklessly. Yet even as the assassin readied himself, a whisper of doubt slithered through him. He had not chosen this target. This kill was stolen from his will, directed by charm. The sons of Set had transformed him into prey and predator both, a weapon wielded by another hand. Shimmer. Hansu crouched low behind the pews, observing. The charm tugged at his thoughts, nudging him closer, suggesting angles, emphasizing the priest's vulnerability. He breathed steadily, recalling his training, the heat of fire, the discipline of flame, the inevitability of action when patience and preparation were aligned. He realized then that the charm was not perfect. It guided, it suggested, it influenced. But it could not replicate instinct, intuition, the subtle perception honed by years of observation in the dojo. Firetide taught more than technique, it taught awareness. And awareness was his weapon. He let the whispers pull him closer, then allowed them to slacken, moving silently. Along the side of the nave, shadow to shadow, light to dark, scanning every detail. Welian Yggdrass's movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Each gesture of prayer, each shift of weight, each glance over the shoulder provided information. The assassin within, though compromised, was still aware. And awareness meant choice. Outside the church, the sons of Set watched from the alleys and rooftops. They had orchestrated the stolen kill with Mizzen. They had bound and charmed Hansu to push him toward this new target. Their plan was meticulous. Yet even in their shadow, they sensed a problem. Hansu was not a man to be directed fully. His flame burned stubborn. They whispered among themselves, shadows coiling in the corners. "He will strike," one hissed. "But perhaps not as we intend." The priest's cluster remained hidden, watching, guiding, waiting. The serpent coils were patient. The flame they pursued was fast, unpredictable, and dangerous. Inside the church, Hanzo moved closer to the altar. The charm pressed, whispered, urged. Yet he controlled his body, his stride measured, careful. He could feel the edges of his free will resisting, the core of Firetide discipline holding firm. Welian Yggdrass rose from the altar, hammer in hand. His eyes caught Hanzu in the shadow. "I know you are there," he said, calm. The city moves, the guild moves, and yet the storm is upon us all. Hanzu exhaled, the residual magic pulling at his limbs, but he did not strike immediately. Observation first, timing second, execution last. The predator and prey dance was not yet over. Stagger. Hanzu's mind analyzed options. The sons of Set had turned him into a weapon, yet a weapon that knew its limits, a weapon tempered by discipline. He could let the charm guide him. He could strike the priest, completing the son's will, or he could find a third path. He crouched low behind the pews, eyes narrowing. Each detail, each shadow, each slight motion from the priest provided a calculus. The Firetide within whispered, "Patience is the flame that consumes all doubt." Observation is fire's first strike. Flame does not burn blindly. The church walls echoed with the quiet chanting of distant worshippers, and the subtle, pervasive hiss of the magic binding him. Hanzu's jaw tightened. Whatever choice he would make, it would be precise, deliberate, and controlled. Even as the sons of Set coiled in the city, waiting to see if their pawn would complete the task, the assassin remained a force undefined, a flame unbound, and a predator observing the dance of life and death. Stifle. The air inside the church quivered. Hanzu, crouched low behind the pews, could feel it before he saw the motion, the unmistakable swell of power rising from the altar. Wellian Yggdrass, the cleric of Thor, lifted his hands, palms open toward the heavens. Light gathered around the stone and candle, a rolling wave of golden faith, and the shadows that clung to Hanzu. The coils, the whispers, the insidious charm of the sons of Set, staggered, quivering as if struck by a tempest. The spellbinding coils that had pressed against his mind and body loosened, the insidious whispers fading. Hanzu exhaled slowly, muscles trembling, but steadying. The Firetide flame within him flared to life, no longer guided by the unseen hand of the serpent priests, no longer a tool of another's will. The cleric drew power from the altar, and pressed outward with the imbued faith, with the force of a tidal wave. "Free the Firetide," he declared, and it was done. Hanzu felt the release in his bones first, then in his mind. The residual pressure lifted, leaving clarity and the heat of controlled adrenaline. The world had realigned itself, shadows retreating from his vision. He breathed again, long and deliberate, the predator within surveying the terrain now free from manipulation. Wellian Yggdrass moved with careful precision, flicking a handful of blessed dust across the pews, the floor, and Hanzu himself. It sparkled in the candlelight like gold motes, sealing the blessing. "I advise you," the cleric said, voice calm but carrying weight. "Avoid those that can bend you to service, or bring some friends to stop it if you cannot. Magic that twists the mind is subtle, and serpents are patient." Hanzu nodded, masking the flicker of gratitude behind his disciplined exterior. He did not speak of thanks. The Firetide way did not bow for mercy or favor. But, internally, he acknowledged that the gift of freedom, however temporary, was not given lightly. The church smelled of pine, wax, and old stone. Hanzu's pulse still hammered, his red garb marked with sweat and faint stains from the earlier courtyard battle. The freedom from the charm had left him in full control again, yet he felt the weight of the city pressing in through the windows. The alleys, rooftops, and hidden passages where the sons of Set might still watch, waiting for an opportunity to bend him once more. He crouched behind a pew, surveying the room, his thoughts moving faster than his muscles could act. The guild's contract still awaited him. Orthel Mizzen, the silversmith, stolen from him, remained in the hands of unknown hands. The sons of Set had turned his hunt into chaos, transformed the hunter into prey, and tested his discipline in ways the guild likely anticipated. Yet even as the adrenaline ebbed, Hanzu began to plan. The Firetide flame was not merely a weapon, it was a tool for observation, for calculation. If the guild had sent him into the city without location or proper intel, as a test, the theft of Mizzen was the next step in evaluating him. The sons of Set were obstacles, yes, but also measurements of patience, resilience, and improvisation. He leaned back, head tilted toward the ceiling, recalling his earliest lessons in the cloister. Observe first, wait second. Strike last. The flame is a predator, it does not rush blindly. The memory grounded him. Signals. Hansu knew he needed information, and fast. The Firetide Guild relied on precision, communication, and hierarchy. There would be no reward in improvisation beyond what his own instincts could achieve. Mizen's life, and the Guild's record of the contract, demanded he reach out. He left the church, careful to avoid the main streets and any lingering followers of Set. The city, waking to twilight, was alive with sound, footsteps, distant calls from merchants, and the faint toll of a bell marking the early hour of night watch. Hansu's senses sharpened, calculating the safest route. He slipped through alleys, over roofs, and down narrow stairways until he found a secure rooftop, where the wind could carry no sound and no casual observer could glimpse his figure. He produced a small folded message scroll from the inner lining of his robe. It bore the seal of Firetide, stamped in black flame, his father's insignia, and the mark that granted any message weight. The scroll itself hummed faintly with imbued magic, designed to deliver messages securely to the Guild's scribe network. Hansu unrolled it, the parchment crisp and deliberate in its wording. To the Masters of Firetide, I am currently engaged in pursuit of contract target, Orthal Mizen. The target has been stolen by unknown parties, likely affiliated with the cult known as the Sons of Set. The initial hunt is compromised. Request guidance and confirmation of authorization to pursue and recover the target. Maintaining discipline and operational security. Hansu of the Firetide. He allowed the scroll to float from his hands, its internal magic ensuring swift, secure passage to the Guild's scribe post. The red flame within him calmed, but his mind remained alert. Patience was still a weapon. Haste could destroy more than opportunity. As he watched the scroll vanish into the ether, he considered the next step. The Sons of Set had acted as an opposing intelligence, and Hansu had no illusions about their patience or reach. They were likely already aware that he had been freed by the Cleric of Thor. Their response could come at any moment. Hansu moved along the rooftops, eyes scanning the alleys below for movement. He could feel the heat of the city, the pulse of its life, the hidden watchfulness of those who hid in shadows. Each alley, each rooftop, each flickering lantern was a line in a map he constructed mentally. He calculated, silently, the likely path Mizen had been taken. The Sons of Set, patient predators themselves, would have chosen a path that balanced secrecy with strategic advantage. They would avoid streets too public, alleys too narrow to escape, rooftops too high to navigate quickly. Their aim, likely, was to move the silversmith toward a location where ritual or recruitment could be completed. Hansu factored these probabilities in silence, using the Firetide method: observe first, predict second, act last. He remembered another lesson from the dojo, taught by Master Rensai, during a night of pouring rain. The flame that burns in darkness must find its own way. Let nothing guide it but observation, let nothing hurry it but opportunity, and let nothing touch it but consequence. The memory anchored him. He would act carefully. He would reclaim the stolen target. He would let the Sons of Set know that a Firetide hunter was neither a weapon to be bent, nor a prey to be stolen. Over the next night, Hansu became a shadow among shadows. He noted patterns of the sun's movements from his perch above. Figures cloaked in black and green slipped through alleys, often glancing upward, as if anticipating pursuit. Hansu followed without detection, leveraging rooftops, narrow ledges, and abandoned chimneys. Each observation, each silent footfall, added to the mental map he built of the cultists' hidden lairs and likely pathways. Patience was discipline. Patience was fire. He allowed the cult to lead him to the trail, rather than charge recklessly. Analyzing every pause, every hesitation, every glimmer of torchlight, the Sons of Set had underestimated one thing: the instinct honed in an all-male cloister, the observation honed over years of ritual and discipline. By midnight, he had triangulated the location where the cultists had hidden Mizen. It was a small building, unassuming, tucked into the back of a merchant district, a former alchemist shop repurposed for secrecy. Hansu noted the guards, their spacing, the shadows cast by the moon. Sweat. He crouched above, muscles coiled, observing. The Firetide discipline did not allow haste. He could strike immediately and risk alerting the Sons of Set, perhaps endangering Mizzen. Or he could prepare, position himself with advantage and strike with precision. He thought of the silversmith, alone and unarmed. He thought of the sons, numerous and patient. He thought of the lessons of the dojo, of the flame that burns slow and warm, of the inevitability of a disciplined strike. Hansu began to formulate a plan. Use rooftops to approach silently, neutralize any sentries quietly, enter the building with minimal exposure. Separate Mizzen from the cultists, escape and regroup. Each step was carefully measured, each probability calculated. He allowed himself no room for error. Observation was the first strike, patience the second, execution the final. Mental preparation. He closed his eyes briefly, drawing in breath. The Firetide flame within flared to life, not just heat, but awareness. He recalled Master Rensai's voice one final time. A flame that dances for another is no flame at all. A hunter must burn for himself, or not at all. Hansu opened his eyes. The decision was clear. He would reclaim Mizzen. He would confront the Sons of Set. He would maintain the integrity of the guild's contract, and his own discipline. But first, he would need confirmation from the guild. The scroll had been sent, but confirmation could take time. Still, observation and preparation would bridge that gap. He would act as both hunter and guardian until the guild responded, letting the flame guide him through the night. Rekindled. The streets of Greenwall stretched before him, darkened alleys and quiet squares. Hansu moved like a shadow, every step silent, every glance calculating. The Sons of Set followed, but now he was aware of them, alert to their motions, ready to anticipate. He was no longer the pawn of their magic. He was a predator returned to his own hunt. The Church of Thor, the blessing of Wellian Yggdrass, the protection of faith, all of it had renewed the Firetide within him. And with that renewal, the city itself became his domain. He would find Mizzen. He would confront the cultists. He would restore the order of his contract, and test the patience of those who thought they could bend fire to their will. The hunt had not ended, it had only transformed. Surge. The streets of Greenwall had grown quiet under the waxing moon, shadows long and mutating in the flicker of lantern light. Hansu had traced the Sons of Set with methodical precision, every alley, every hidden stairway, every rooftop gap calculated in his mind. The city itself became a map of their movements, a chessboard on which each piece could be anticipated. Below the worn cobbles and merchant stalls, the pit awaited. A hidden chamber, whispered about in rumors, a nest of serpents coiled beneath the city. Hansu descended carefully, letting the darkness guide him, relying on the memory of his steps, and the faint scent of incense and iron. The Firetide flame within him burned steady, warm, deliberate, a predator. Moving toward prey, it could not yet see, but could already feel. The air in the pit was heavy, humid, reeking of damp stone, sweat, and the faint tinge of human fear. His senses expanded, noting every whisper, every subtle movement of shadow across stone. Then came the scream, sharp and sudden, echoing through the tunnels like the crack of a whip. His pace quickened, muscles coiled, mind narrowing into a singular focus. The prey was here, or had been. He rounded a corner and found Mizzen's body, still warm, a silver-streaked wound across his chest. The silversmith's eyes stared blankly, a flash of terror frozen in his final expression. Rage and cold precision merged inside Hansu. He did not flinch, did not pause, but the fire within him flared hotter. Before he could move, the traps fell. Iron portcullises slammed down with the thunderous force of stone, hitting stone, confining him in a narrow corridor. The Sons of Set emerged from shadowy alcoves, grins twisting their faces into serpentine masks. "Too late, Firetide?" one hissed. You cannot save the prey. Honor is useless against power. The weight of the iron was an attempt to intimidate, to subdue, yet Hansu's body responded not with panic, but with focus. He remembered the lessons of his youth, the summer of constant drills in the cloister, lifting stones larger than his chest, moving heavy beams across the yard, practicing the perfection of form, until sinew and bone became one. Now, those lessons became strength. With a grunt and a controlled surge, he planted both hands against the cold steel and lifted it just enough to slip through, muscles straining, heart steady, eyes like molten coals. The sons of Set reacted too slowly. Hanzo moved through them like fire through dry brush. He struck first with his elbows, snapping jaws and crushing rib cages, knees following, boots, striking with the precision of a monk who had learned to use every part of his body as weapon. Each movement was deliberate, every blow a continuation of a lesson learned decades before: speed, weight, balance, observation. A priest advanced, dagger raised, voice chanting in the sibilant hiss of the Set tongue. Hanzu's sword flashed, catching the dim torchlight, slicing across the cultist's forearm, before planting a boot squarely in his chest, sending him crashing into stone. Others came, trying to overwhelm him, but he flowed around them, limbs a blur, body pivoting with the grace of a predator striking its prey. Blood spilled freely, pooling and streaking across the stone floor. Hanzu did not flinch. Pain, fatigue, or fear had no purchase here. He was fire incarnate, a disciplined predator, his every action an extension of the lessons drilled into him since boyhood. Each cultist that fell added to the rhythm: observe, calculate, strike. By the time the last of the sons of Set had collapsed, the pit was silent except for the shallow breathing of the predator and the echoes of shattered stone and broken bodies. Hanzu stood among them, sword in hand, chest heaving, eyes burning. The prey might have been lost, but the Firetide flame was intact, eternal, and no serpent could bend it. The pit reeked of blood and incense. Hanzu stepped over bodies, boots silent on the wet stone, and allowed himself a brief pause. He inspected the fallen cultists, noting the precision of his strikes and the effectiveness of his form. Each movement had been deliberate, each strike a reflection of the lessons learned in the cloister. Strength, yes, but discipline was the true weapon. He knelt beside Mizen's body, assessing the silversmith for any signs of lingering life, but it was clear the guild's target had been taken before he could intervene. Rage flashed, but Hanzu tempered it. Firetide taught that uncontrolled emotion was a tool of the untrained, and the flame must be guided. He retrieved Mizen's satchel and other belongings, careful to leave the scene as undisturbed as possible under the circumstances. Every action was calculated, not for sentiment but for the integrity of the contract. Even in death, the responsibility remained. Hanzu knew he could not remain here. The sons of Set might have been destroyed, but their influence lingered in the city. Every shadow could conceal an agent, every alley a trap. He needed to return to the surface, to report, and to plan. Guild. Hanzo moved through the catacombs and tunnels, retracing his steps with a silent grace. The city above was waking, lanterns lit, merchants beginning their morning routines, children moving through narrow alleys, oblivious to the violence below. Hanzo ascended through hidden stairwells, emerging on a deserted rooftop. From here, he prepared a message for the guild. The Firetide seal, the black flame insignia of his father, marked it as authentic. He folded the scroll carefully, imbuing it with a simple enchantment for secure delivery. To the masters of Firetide, the target of contract, Orthel Mizen has been abducted and subsequently killed by the sons of Set. The initial hunt has been compromised. I have neutralized immediate threats in the pit beneath Greenwall. Request guidance on next course of action regarding stolen contract. Operational discretion maintained. Hanzu of the Firetide. The scroll floated into the night air, carried by magic and destiny alike. Hanzu watched it disappear, his mind already cataloguing potential next steps. The guild would respond, but he could not wait idly. Observation, preparation, patience. These were his weapons as surely as sword and fist. plotting. Hansu crouched on the edge of a roof, eyes scanning the alleys and rooftops below. Patterns emerged even in the chaos, figures moving with purpose, lanterns held high for signaling, shadows lingering longer than they should. The sons of Set had not been idle. They were patient, organized, dangerous. The loss of Mizzen was a lesson, a test, but also a warning. He traced the probable path of cultist activity through rooftops and alleys. Narrow streets provided concealment, merchant districts offered temporary barriers. Hansu noted each detail, storing it for later action. He could strike again, but only when all variables aligned. Firetide discipline demanded it. He recalled the lesson from Master Renzai: the flame that burns slow is the flame that consumes all obstacles. The hunter who strikes without knowledge feeds another's victory. Hansu allowed the city to guide him, his senses absorbing every motion, every flicker of shadow, every whisper of sound. By the second night, Hansu had mapped the sun's possible retreats, safe houses, and likely gathering points. His plan was methodical: identify and monitor cultist activity without detection, anticipate the location of any surviving agents or remnants of Mizzen's abduction, prepare for engagement only when conditions were optimal. Report progress to the guild continuously through secure channels. Every step was calculated, every motion measured. Hansu moved like shadow over stone, silent as air, observing the city as he had learned in the cloister. The Firetide flame guided him, but the predator within waited. When the moment came, he would act not as an uncontrolled fury, but as a precise instrument of discipline and calculation. Hansu considered the sons of Set carefully. They were numerous, patient, and organized. Yet they were unprepared for a predator who had been tested, honed, and freed from manipulation. Their strength lay in numbers and magic. His lay in discipline, observation, and the inevitability of the Firetide way. He began to anticipate their moves, which streets they would use, where they might hide, and how they would react to his approach. He envisioned himself moving through the shadows, body coiled, sword ready, senses extended. Every alley, every rooftop, every shadow became part of his map. Renewal of purpose. Hansu paused at the edge of a rooftop, looking over the city of Greenwall. The moonlight reflected off the rooftops, illuminating paths and potential dangers. He inhaled, feeling the steady burn of the Firetide flame within him. Mizzen's death was a loss, but it was also a lesson. The sons of Set had acted with cunning and patience, yet they had underestimated a true Firetide. The guild would provide guidance, but Hansu's discipline ensured that he was already prepared for any eventuality. Observation, patience, and the inevitability of action. They were the principles that would guide him forward. Hansu adjusted the sword on his back, checked the red garb, and prepared to move once more. The city was alive, the sons of Set still lurking, and the Firetide hunter had found a new path. The flame burned slow, warm, eternal.